are. I'm so excited to be here. Okay. I feel like I'm starting to say this at every episode, but this episode is so special to me. This was such an interesting one to create because unlike the last one, what did I say about the last one? I said, like, no matter how many times I went through it, I could not make it come together. This episode is not like that at all. This episode, I don't even remember when my last episode was released, to be honest. Was it 2 weeks? Was it 3 weeks ago? I don't know. I really don't know. But I didn't give a shit because I had a workshop that I was organizing. So I knew as soon as I finished vulnerability that I would not get to imagination. Oh, and by the way, hey, welcome to SENSI. This is the next episode, sensitivity and imagination, by the way. But honestly, it feels too early to introduce that right now because so much came here that I didn't expect. So I wasn't working on it because I was getting ready for the workshop. I knew that I was going to be focusing on the workshop and this was just going to have to be dealt with whenever it was dealt with, which sounds very dismissive to me. I don't like that, but it would be focused on and developed in its own right timing. So I think it was the day before the podcast, the day before the workshop happened, that I decided to open the document because I'd finished what I had to do for the workshop and just see where my notes were because I hadn't looked at the notes for this episode at all. But I opened it and I started dictating. Like, the first statement of my notes here is, I want to begin this episode going over the trajectory of this podcast. And that was what I came to with. I was like, I feel like there's something missing, something I want to make clear that I haven't yet. So as I'm deciding to write it down, I'm noticing how the thoughts are coming out already organized. That does not always happen for me. Even the way that I divide the segments, like I said last episode, into talking points, it came out exactly like that. And it was like 2.5 pages and I felt a sense of completion. I knew it was exactly what I wanted it to be. And I had this feeling of, don't edit it. It is exactly exquisitely what needs to be said. Don't even fucking touch it. So I didn't. And then a lot of the other parts that came in were not things that I even had intended for this episode. They were things that I'd noted and put into a course that I'm developing that have been in my notes for this podcast for a while, but I couldn't, it just wasn't time to talk about them yet. I wasn't focusing on topics that were related to these notes, but so my point being that, like, I feel like my fingerprints are just not really on this episode at all. I really just feel like I channeled a lot of this information. And I feel like I could go off on that forever like I do a million other things, but I'm going to let that just speak for itself. I really feel like I'm just dictating to you something that came to me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm narrating something for you is how it feels here. So bear with me because at least for the first half of this podcast, I'm basically going to be reading off a script. And like, I always have my notes, but I ramble and I go off my notes. I do not intend to do that with this episode because at least 80% of the information here, I feel like I didn't analyze. I didn't decide, just like I said, my fingerprints aren't on it. It came in and it was done. There was no editing. It was only like the last quarter max that I edited and rearranged. Everything else came in. I was just like, okay, cool. There you go. That's what it is. So let's get the fuck into it. I want to begin this episode going over the trajectory of this podcast. I have already spoken about the idea of last season and the transitioning into this season, right? I've already talked about the where we are coming from or coming through, but I want to focus a bit more on the where we are going and where I am taking you with this, what I want to be achieving here. So yes, last season was about the stereotype and the character traits that we'd been stuck with or typecast as, and legitimizing those experiences. We were humanizing them for things that we had been, dehumanized for at times. And emotionally or energetically, really last season for me was me showing up as a safe space that maybe you hadn't had in life, served as a mirror that you hadn't had in life, because I fucking know how powerful that is. It was me, in a statement showing up being like, I won't shame you. And I won't be ashamed of my experience here, right? I am going to expose myself here so that you can find safety here if you can't find that safety elsewhere, or you can't yet find that perspective in yourself. And in that safety, we can begin to look at how we are wrong and the ways we have behaved inappropriately or gone too far, ways we have lacked boundaries and caused harm to others. Because acknowledging our faults and our missteps is no longer an act of betrayal once it is safe. Once we can validate it, humanize it, know that it's real, know that other people have felt it too, and that it's okay. Acknowledging how we are wrong or things that are invalid or inappropriate is no longer an act of betrayal, because we are holding these experiences in their rich and real nuance already. We are holding them wholly. It is no longer a threat to admit when we're wrong or silly or whatever it might be. And then from there, we get into a sense of identity and how we hold this identity and how we maintain it, how we are actually responsible for maintaining the thing that hurts us. And what we get out of it, right? Like, why are we maintaining it? Because we get something out of it. What do we get out of it? Because realizing and talking about all of this is where our power lies. This is where our power lies, in us, right? And in our actions. So if we don't want other people to identify us in some kind of way, then we better start with ourselves first, right? How do we identify? And do we even know that there is so much more that we can identify as, because there's so much more to us than we have ever entertained or had proof of, external proof of yet. And then breaking that concept open. And then here we get to a turning point in all this, because here is where we have to accept our pain. This is where we have to accept rupture and let rupture in, where we have to let go of those grudges, even though, and acknowledging that they have served their purposes. We have to let go of who we have thought we were, our past, our expectations of others or ourselves. We have to grieve. We have to grieve what has hurt us. We have to let it in and let it through. Because we have been avoiding these experiences, and so they keep looping back. We have to admit them. We have admitted them, I want to say. To expand beyond these experiences, this identity, to get more out of life, to broaden who we are and live life differently, we have to be willing to meet pain and let it change us. And let it change us for the better, not harden us. Because this is the only way, and I really feel the need emotionally to sit on that. This is the only way we can get to the other side and experience rapture, to experience freedom and integration and embodiment and change. So now we are on a new path, symbolically, and in the course of this podcast, and the course of this new season in this podcast. So I want to preface this to the imagery that I'm really focusing when I am lining this out here, when I'm describing, because I've recently rearranged the next, including this one actually. This one wasn't actually supposed to be right after vulnerability, but the next 5 episodes I think I've kind of rearranged recently. And it was funny because as I was finishing the notes for vulnerability, I put this down there because I thought of it. And then as soon as I was like, why is it not organized like this? This is literally the only way for it to be. That's crazy that I didn't do this before. But the imagery that I'm thinking of with it is the Genesis. And I obviously, I know that comes from the Bible, right? But I will be very clear here. I have never actually read the Bible. I've read parts of the Bible, but I've never read the Bible. So this isn't my source here. My source is more, I think the documentary is called The Zeitgeist or whatever. I remember watching that when I was like 19, and it talks about parallels amongst religion and even reflected in nature and so on, and the stars. I thought that was really cool. So that imagery, but also I think of C.S. Lewis. When I was 14, I first read Narnia and The Magician and His Nephew. I think that's what it's called. they have the Genesis of Narnia, which I noticed, I think, in newer books, like my partner has a copy, like a series where they're all individual books, and I think it's called The Beginning of Narnia or The Birth of Narnia or something like that. But in the copy I got, which was actually my sister's for Christmas in like 2002 or something, it's called The Genesis of Narnia. And that was my first ever exposure to what Genesis was. So anyway, when I'm thinking about it, that is the imagery that I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of that initial hum of life and that awakening to itself, and then things growing from there. This openness, this sense of anything is possible, right? This formless information, everything is buzzing and can come to be, and the forms that it takes. This is really the imagery that I think of. And I'm assuming now that I've said this, if you've listened to previous episodes, you'll be like, oh yeah, that totally tracks with what she's talking about. She was definitely thinking about this when she wrote other things. Because yes, indeed I was. So back to this intro section. Let's see what I said here. So now we were on a new path, symbolically and in the course of this podcast and in this season. And I think this is it's not, I don't think, I know it. I know that rapture, right? Ending last season with rapture, beginning it with rapture. This was exquisitely what it was in sensitivity as rapture, right? The first episode of this season, I talked about the way we view death and fear death, even if it's just a symbolic, emotional ego death, but it's actually a part of a life cycle. And you can also see it as a rebirth. That is exquisitely what I'm talking about when I'm thinking rupture and rapture. Rapture is a rebirth. You avoid pain because it means death on whatever level, whatever plane, when really it's a rebirth. And as soon as you admit that, you can then experience that rapture. You can experience that rebirth. And again, just ties into all this here. The new path begins at the beginning. Rapture, rebirth. And the beginning is a big bang. It is a nothing to a something. A lack of awareness to consciousness. So this season, after reestablishing things with rapture, we began with energy. If we take things back from these predetermined orders of operation, meanings and value judgments that we have been stuck in, socialized to, constricted by, that we've misunderstood and despise, what then? What does that mean for our identity? What precedes these things? What does that mean for our identity and our ability to cultivate a new, truer one, if none of these forms are inherently true? Sensitivity is a place of subtlety. It is the domain of energy, of impression, of delicateness, of vulnerability. It is where things begin. And correct me if I'm wrong, but as a sensitive person, the large imposing forms, which I put all in capitals, the large imposing forms being plopped down on vulnerable possibility and the big boots trampling over a seedling is against our nature. It goes against our better judgment. It goes against our instinct, because when current convention is put forth, when current convention is put forth as the ultimate source of rhyme and reason, we cannot sense subtlety. Possibility is squashed, it is vanquished, and we lash out because we feel deprived of any sense there is in life and in living. And then I quoted Led Zeppelin, our spirit is crying for leaving. We do not know how to operate in this paradigm and we want to escape it. So we undo it. We take it back to openness. We take it back to possibility. We cultivate our awareness of this state of being again. We expand our concept of it by sitting in it. And remember what no one else is there to model for us. And I think a perfect way to elucidate this is with the example of imagination, which is what we're going to get into in this episode when it eventually starts here. But from this place, establishing this place where we can explore the nature of openness and possibility again, we then take our first step back toward form with, which is the next episode, consciousness, a waking up. So we started with rapture, which was the, revisiting the past season, what it was all about, all the things, and establishing our trajectory for this season and so on. Rapture, then we got into energy, which took 2 episodes. Then we got into vulnerability, imagination here, and then we get into consciousness. We take our first step back toward form with consciousness, a waking up, an awareness that is aware of itself, to consciousness, the awareness, that awareness and its ability to discern. And I said this is huge because discernment is related to judgment and differentiation, right? This is different from that. Dualistic thinking or form-based thinking, to solitude. So if forms are discrete, as in separate things, there's a this and a that, there are others, there's othered things, because there's separation, there is the ability to be alone. When we are separated from the all, from everything, from the collectiveness, right? This consciousness is no longer a collective consciousness. It is isolated and it is distinct, which I conceptualize as divinely separated, which is something I get into in the course that is not finished yet. But because of this, there is the potential for antisocial behavior, because all is not one. They are separate things. There can be this lack of connection, and something can now has the potential, the free will, whatever, to separate itself because it is distinct. It can be antisocial. Coming back to season 1 here, but I bring that up too because where last season it was about antisocial behavior, it was about a negative expression, perhaps in being an extreme or an act against our inner nature. This season we're offering the complementary of solitude. So we're talking about the negative expression, solitude. We're going to talk about this as a natural, rich, beautiful experience, and what divides the two. What is what? You know, what divides one from the other. But we're going to leave it there for now, going over the episodes, because at this point, I write, to use an evolutionary analogy, we have grown legs and climbed out of the water. The titles of the episodes from there on out are self-explanatory. But I will say that this season is somewhat like coming back into wholeness, where we have re-entering the world of forms. We are a functioning human being. We are a discrete experience of consciousness, as we were to begin season 1. But now, through the process of this season, we are going to experience that sort of lived experience, that divinely separated experience, from the intelligence that sensitivity offers us, which is a very, very different proposition. And that's what we're going to be establishing throughout this season. Living through sensitivity rather than in opposition to sensitivity, which is, I believe, human nature. And I also have a plan to elaborate on this framework. Mid-season, I'm hoping mid-season to release it, a private podcast called Sensitivity and the Archetype. So be excited. But for now, welcome to Sensitivity and Imagination. So, what the fuck is imagination, right? I don't really view it like this, but it can very, very much be viewed like some dark, dusty corner of our minds where we can hole ourselves up in to avoid reality. And if we spend too much time there, we will lose touch and become delusional. And I can't say that that's wrong, because I think absolutely it can be utilized like that. But I think a lot of times that's because we don't always know how to best use it. Yeah. We don't know where to best use it. And a lot of times the way that we do utilize it is to avoid a life where we are very unhappy, to create something that is idyllic, right? When we feel that our life is just nothing but pain. But that isn't imagination, right? That is us trying to adapt to a shitty situation, and it just happens to end up being maladaptive, but still serves purposes. I've been there. But imagination, like vulnerability, is where anything can begin, is how I imagine it. Anything that people have ever talked about or created has begun in the imagination. You can pull anything out of your imagination and bring it to life. Anything, maybe not anything, but like a lot more than we fucking think. Everything begins in the imagination. God itself, which I wrote here, is a human construct. That was an idea that was repeated and repeated and repeated until it was revered and disseminated. But, when I looked at that, I was like, I don't know about that. God itself, I want to say, is an experience that humans constructed into a very discrete idea. And that idea was repeated and repeated and repeated and disseminated until this reverence around it built up, right? Books were written about it. Wars have been started over it. Churches, temples, cathedrals, basilicas were built for this idea. People have died for this idea. Architecture itself has such a long history of invention, and it itself was pushed to its limits and forced to imagine new impossible things until they were possible for high churches so that people could come worship the God that they constructed. People travel across the world because these ideas mean so much to them. Books themselves, and before the books that we have now, there was the process of imagining and creating paper and the printing press. Before that, stone tablets and the tools we use to engrave on stone tablets. And before that, stories were still developed and other information that was organized. People wanted to preserve, so they told it and told it and told it again until it became culture. You know what I mean? People repeated it until it was preserved just through word alone. So then I said, before stories, there was thought and language itself, which are also ever-evolving creative endeavors in their own right. Communities and tribes themselves and the organization of that and the structures of that, to globally connected culture, the internet and phones, and even the postal service itself, every object you find in the mall itself. All of these things, all of these forms began as something projected in the imagination. Everything that we live by and have around us is a result of someone's imagination. The way that I imagine it is as like the rough draft before the rough draft. This relationship does not have to be a delusional one that takes you out of reality. It can be the one that takes you deeper into reality. So, my opening notes for this episode were, not originally for this episode, these were notes that were actually taken from the course that I've mentioned, I think, twice now in this episode already. Which is it's something. Just like I said, I kind of feel like I channeled this episode. I'm just dictating something to you that came in very, very clearly for me. That course is the exact same thing for me. When I look at my notes for that course, the way that it's structured and organized, even the titles of the modules and the submodules and everything, it doesn't feel like it has my fingerprint on it at all. If you look at any of my other documents for the podcast or manuscripts that I have, screenplays, other courses, they don't look like that. I don't know what it is about that, but I really feel like when things come in, I'm like, oh yes, that's for that course. I just put it down. You don't edit it. There is nothing but clarity. And if I try and fuck with it, it's just going to muddle it and it's not going to have clarity. And that's how I feel about the notes that I have for this episode as well. Imagination, fertile ground, that black, empty, quote unquote, empty space of pure sensing. Like a portal out of our separated, dualistic human perspective, the material versus the immaterial, into the unity and forever changing, where energy is constantly in motion and takes no brittle forms. When you try to describe things as they appeared and changed in your imagination, you have to over-explain or leave things out because they do not operate based on forms. They are energy. Not a solid, but a vapor that is quick to disperse and move like clouds. That changeability and that openness is vulnerability. Being able to sit with that morphing and shifting is you sitting with vulnerability. It is akin to vulnerability. Where vulnerability, as we tend to know it, is such a teeter-totter for us, right? We are attuned to disregarding and minimizing and snagging up the possibilities and assuming the relationships between them, right? As quickly as possible. We don't want to wait for things to play out. We swat everything else away and we squish something into the form that we think it's going to ultimately take, or that we need it to take, and then we move the fuck on. We don't waste time here, right? That's impractical. When we are in the field of imagination, we sit on our damn hands, I wrote. We keep them to ourselves and allow things to morph and change, because in that zone, that is the name of the game. We expect it there, therefore we accept it there. Okay? When we are in the field of imagination, when we are in that space of openness, we just sit on our damn hands. And that's maybe not even the best way to word it, because we don't, that implies that you have to sit on your hands to keep yourself from grabbing and touching things, right? We don't have to. We just sit with it. We just allow the morphing and the changing in it. We trust. There is such trust there. And the reason I'm reiterating this is because, do you see how safe you feel in that experience? How contained that experience feels, even in its openness and its changeability? It is such a vulnerable experience. I even have a note here that I said, if not the ultimate experience of vulnerability, because you are completely open. And that's why I think it's such a good example to visit when trying to expand our concept of vulnerability and develop a sense of safety in it. Because we are completely open when we are in our imagination. There is such confidence that bracing against is nearly non-existent. Like, we can imagine the most deranged shit. We can imagine our worst fears coming true, or our wildest dreams. We can imagine us acting and saying and doing things and dressing in ways and being in places that we would never imagine being in real life, or ever saying to someone else or admitting, because we feel safe enough to do so. Even in our worst fears, like, our body reacts, we get scared, but we still feel safe enough to continue imagining it, because we know that we are imagining it. We know that we're playing with it. You know what I mean? It's scary, it's dangerous. It can make you feel paranoid, right? If you're not careful, you can become delusional because of it. But we hold these images and these feelings and thoughts because we feel safe to do so here. If we didn't feel safe to do so, we would not even imagine them in our imagination, right? In your imagination, you are completely open. You are shameless. That is vulnerability. Back to those original notes from the course. Your imagination is the blackboard for your creations, the most dynamic of blackboards. And I just love that imagery too. Where you can create or recreate forms and change them at will. Where time is not linear. Where you can play out an interaction or practice one that you anticipate actually doing. You can zoom back 30 seconds, or you can jump forward 2 minutes or a year when looking at how to say something and the potential consequences of it down the road. It is such rich playing field. Imagination is rich soil in which anything can grow. It is such a creative space. Just like vulnerability, so many possibilities can come into being here. It is so creative. And this is why we, as sensitive people, are, quite often very creative people, because things make an impression on us. What doesn't make a fucking impression on us, honestly? We are constantly looking at things in new ways. We are always imagining things. We are prolific in this way. The only problem is that when we are trying to lean on these things as hard forms. And we have a tendency to do this because we are taught that hard forms, cut and dry things, are the most valuable. So we we strive to attain and embody this ideal. This is actually incorrect here. This is an inappropriate way to behave in this field of being. Whatever. It is incorrect here. That is the incorrect way to behave here, because this is a very adaptive place and we want it to remain moldable and adaptive, because that is where our strength and our tenacity comes from. It comes from that adaptiveness. So what we want to be doing when we view and imagine all of these things is not to misinterpret them or desperately rush to make them a hard form, make them reality, to validate our experience of them, because our experience of them is real. We contemplate these things as soft forms. They're real, they're here, they're soft forms. These possibilities, all these possibilities we're seeing, imagining, feeling, they have weight, they have meaning, but they do not bear armor. We do not monumentalize them. If you've listened a while, you'll see how I corrected that, because I think it was last season I said monumentize. Not a word, and that is not a word. The word is monumentalize them. We allow release here. In our imagination, we can allow release of all these beautiful ideals that we see and want. We can subdue them, we can integrate them, we can release them. And even when imagining some of our scariest things, we are able to let them go. We don't hold on to them forever. We don't monumentalize them. We allow them to continue to mold and shift. We allow the energy to move. Now, when you think of things through this lens of sensitivity, you'll see that nature of ours, it makes us so impressionable. That impressionable nature actually only gives us more ways to process our experience. It gives us more ways to experience. It gives us more opportunities for life experience. It's so fucking rich, right? It gives us resources rather than just more forms to carry. We are not burdened by this proclivity at all. We might mishandle it. We are not burdened by the proclivity in itself. We have so many fucking options because of this proclivity. We have the choice between so many things, all the things that you imagine and sense and feel and believe, and decisions that you are anticipating or conceptualizing. We have so many fucking options. Anything that you can think of, anything that you can generate meaning around, build emotion around, or build beliefs on, you can work to then embody it in your life. Which is a reason we want to call back to the meaning episode, we need to choose wisely. We're not a victim of this. We're not burdened by all these options. We are the captain here. It is up to us to choose, and choose wisely, because we need to know that anything that we're imagining and playing with, there is a result here. We are generating feeling. We are creating associations. We are assuming relationships. We are building beliefs. We are changing our nervous system and the way we expect things from people, the way we relate to people. I often think of, in a relationship, how you can get in your head as to why did they do this? Are they cheating on me? Go down this line of thought, imagining and backing up every little thing you see for that to be the cause. You are choosing that. You are choosing to spend your time here, generate these feelings, these associations, and that changes the way that you react to this person, treat this person, what you expect from this person, and it changes your relationship. In this sense, you are manifesting, if they're cheating, right? Like, that's not something you're manifesting, but I'm saying that relationship, that directly comes out in real life. They could not be doing anything wrong. You could imagine this so much and back up that imagination and make it a hard form to you, even if it's not literally a hard form. That has huge influence on your life. And we have such a tendency, not just us as sensitive people, but people as a whole. I really think it's like socialization, man. I don't like it. I'm not about this way of living, but we tend to be quite cynical. It is almost encouraged to be, what's the word? Pessimistic. We think that it's somehow more mature, more valid to be pessimistic. So we often utilize our imagination, which is a totally neutral, open space where we can bring things into being, create forms that we can then play with and integrate into our lives in one way or another. We tend to use it in pessimistic ways. We back up negative paths, the most disappointing and hurtful things, to prepare ourselves. But all we're really doing is, there was a word that came to my mind there. Like preparing our lives for this outcome. We're laying the groundwork for this way of relating, for this type of relationship, for this sort of treatment, even if it's not actually a hard form. Again, why we need to distinguish so much between a hard form has value, soft forms. They have value. They're soft. You need to choose wisely, right? Moving on. Again, this is kind of unfair. I think it's very unfair because I don't think this is the way we should be using imagination. We need to almost recalibrate and be like, this is a very neutral thing. We can create many positives from here as well. And when we are focusing so much on the negative, that's a choice, and it's very, very harmful for us in our lives and our relationships. We have options. So many options, good, bad, whatever, anything in between. There are so many options. When we have that many options, how can you ever be unsupported? When you can lean into whatever options you want and build on those things, and have the best of it influence you and your nervous system activity, and you know what I mean, like the way you imagine and relate and anticipate and approach situations and relationships, and how you show up as the best of yourself. Like, how can you not be supported? The imagination is completely neutral. It's not mandating any sort of negativity. You know what I mean? Just think about that. And then when there are leftover meanings, when there are things that harm us and weigh us down, whatever, when there are those leftover meanings, that doesn't mean, we're a victim. There are forms, and there's hard forms, because that's the only kind of forms they are, and I guess that's just the life I have to live by. When there are leftover meanings are always generated in us. They are ours. We have the opportunity to be creative yet again and recycle those meanings into different expressions. We can repurpose that energy into movement. We can carry a message through a piece of art. We can refine it and cultivate it into language for clarity in ourselves, but also to communicate to someone else. You know what I mean? Like, there are so many ways that you can choose to redirect it. It's like the whole conversation of emotions, you know, oh, it's because the sadness did it. It's, you know, I didn't mean it. I was just angry, that kind of thing. To me, and I get that people say that emotions, they are energy in motion. They want to take action. I'm not trying to deny that. But in my experience, the more I sit with my emotions, the more intelligence I can get from them, and the more nuance. They don't directly lead to an action. They don't justify behaviors, you know what I mean? At all. You have such a beautiful space of anticipating and imagining and feeling the possibilities, and anticipating or cultivating directions for those impulses. Like, there are so many ways that we can choose to utilize the things that we imagine and feel, but we have to know that imagination is rich soil where things are wont to grow. When you imagine things, that in itself is a choice. You were choosing what to imagine, where to put that energy, because it is energy. And then when you imagine it and you see forms, words, feelings, emotions, history, you know, associations, relationships, you are generating forms to sense that the natural consequence is meaning and emotion will generate that will back certain beliefs. This is a pipeline. So what you were doing with your imagination is going to instigate things to run through that pipe. What are you imagining? Again, choose wisely. You know, we're going to think of the worst. We're going to think of sad things, but I think this acknowledgement is so necessary to be able to use it fairly and with good boundaries, and to the most potential that it has. Like, it can have such a positive influence on your life, and I don't think that we do that, because again, so acclimated to being pessimistic. But then at the same time, there was another reason. Because imagination is some dark, dusty corner that makes you delusional. So these are both, I feel like, very fear-based beliefs, fear-based imaginings, fear-based feelings, fear-based belief, fear-based actions, fear-based identity. That's all a choice, period. Moving on. And I just am so aware of the possibility, all the possibilities that are stemmed, right, again, back to that definition of energy being formless information. Like, the potential of all the forms of everything is like, feels so rich. Where when we're not sensing, it can very much seem like a one lump sum. It seems like one hard form that we cannot distinguish, that we cannot feel into, we can't sense. There's no nuance. But as we begin to tap in and sense, and imagination is a tool to utilize here, we can then begin to because here's the thing. We're generating things. And a lot of times there's a history of emotion and feeling here that's already, again, backing up what we're imagining. Because we're not actually tuned in. A lot of times we're just coming at it based on these forms. Well, I learned because growing up that this meant that. So when something even remotely like it happens in my life, I'm going to imagine the worst case scenarios. That's not sensing. That's not being open. That's assuming relationships, you know what I mean? That's just creating hard forms on hard forms on hard forms. That's the process of making monuments. I'm not talking about that shit. As we tap into that openness, to that blank blackboard, to that sense of potential, potentiality, possibility. I feel like that guy on Happy Gilmore. It's a circle, Happy. We're again trying to be from this state of openness. We're not trying to come in with biases. We're not trying to come in with conclusions. We just see what comes up and we play with it gently. When we do this without any vested interests, let's say it that way, this can be a process of learning to differentiate between the quality of meanings we feel, between the quality of forms, intentions, desires. It is us being able to differentiate the facets of our subjective experience. This is a process of discernment, I think. This process of being vulnerable, of being open, again, not with vested interests. Fuck the assumed relationships. You're coming back to that beginning, to that awareness, coming aware of itself and witnessing everything. And you are just witnessing and you are discerning. Where when we come from where we usually do, things are already a hard form and it becomes too scary to even anticipate or question. And it's hard to sense. I imagine it almost like, because I'm a massage therapist probably, I imagine like muscle tension constricting around the nerves and the circulatory system. Like blood flow can't be as good when there's that much constriction. Nerve impulses aren't going to be as quick. And I don't remember learning about this in school, but I always think about how if there's an electrical impulse coming through a nerve, but there's so much constriction around it because of muscle tissue and whatever else, scar tissue, the nerve impulse can't get through. It doesn't just disappear. I imagine it like zapping the tissue in that area. It can't get through, it just zaps and it dissolves and it disperses throughout the tissue right there, hardening it even more, increasing tension and restriction even more, increasing pain, reducing mobility. I'm really getting off topic here. That's what I imagine when I'm saying like this lump form. That's what I'm imagining. And this lump gets harder and harder and harder, and it's more painful until you don't even want to acknowledge it. You want to ignore it, you want to ignore it, you want to ignore it. And this is tapping out, tapping out, tapping out, tapping out, right? You can't discern shit from here. Because at this point, there's so much compensation. You know, there's so much being thrown off, and you've just like normalized this being thrown off, that there's just, you're not a good judge, you know what I mean? Like there is no discernment here. There's tapping into openness, into possibility, and expanding these experiences. This is what we can do with the imagination. This is how the imagination can be utilized. We do it through expanding our perception rather than collapsing it. Just like I said in vulnerability, right? We rush so quickly to close off the experience of vulnerability because we're scared and it hurts. We brace against it and we close. We want to minimize. We don't do it through collapsing our experience. We do it through expanding our perception and our experience. And again, imagination is such a beautiful tool to use to do this. It is a beautiful bridge between energy and hard forms. It is that, I said something like, I talked about the intersection of meaning in energy part 2, and this is like really what I'm thinking about here, where we're so used to it going A to B. There's energy into forms. This place of imagination, and imagination is one, right? But beneath that, it's about the experience of openness that you find in vulnerability. It's in this place, and expanding this and sitting here and feeling into this space is where you have the opportunity to play with meanings, where you get to be a part of the process of deciding what forms you want to seal, right? So soft forms aren't pure energy. They do have meaning. There is some forming here, but they are moldable. They have not taken a hard form. And you get to be a part of, do I want to seal this form? It is becoming a form. It's becoming recognizable. I'm building a system of identity and belief around this thing. How does it feel? All these things. Do I want to seal it? Because you still have that opportunity, much easier here than once it becomes a hard form, to be like, do I want to keep feeding this, or do I want to start starving it off and redirecting that energy elsewhere? You know, where you get to ask questions like, you know, again, what does it mean to me? But not just one meaning. What all does this mean to me from different angles, different facets? What is this meaning to me? What different beliefs are backing this? What do I want them to mean? What do I want to mean things to me? What actions do I want to take? And why do I want to take them? What actions do I wish I would take instead? How do I want to handle this? What does it feel like? This is my favorite one. So it's not just like, oh, tapping into what I already want from where I am right now. It's a possibility thing, right? It's more focusing on the possibility, not backing up where you your current perspective. It's like making you look at new ones. What does it feel like if I do this? You know, maybe I wouldn't want to. Maybe I don't see I don't see myself acting like this. Maybe I've never acted like this before, but just like throwing it out there. What does it feel like if I do this? What does it feel like if I say this? Or what if it's safe if I just don't say anything? What does it feel like if I be this? If I say that, if I go here, you know what I mean? Just like, it's not about being like, oh, no, again, not that's wrong. It's like, oh, but what about this? And what about that? And what about that? And I would never fucking act like this, but what if I did this? What does that feel like in my body? What do I think this person would react to how do I think they'd react if I did this? You know, and just bringing in, to me, like the most unhinged shit is the most fun, because oftentimes when I bring in the most unhinged shit, or at least what feels like the most unhinged thing at that time, it's not about wanting to do it. It's bringing in such a new perspective that it jolts me into a different emotional state. So if I imagine it like that, a lot of times there's a sense of shock and novelty, and it's fun, and it makes this process really fun. That eventually will kind of almost soften into like there's almost like a nugget within this really outlandish thing that is true to me, or there's something I can learn in it. Or if I would do this thing that I would never actually like think that I would do, and I see how it makes me feel, and I see how I think people would react to that, it gives a freshness. It's just a fresh perspective. So even if the outlandish thing is something that's a soft form for a moment, and then I never think of it again, it generates a different feeling in me, which then brings up different beliefs that I have. It brings up different possibilities of outcomes, and then it's refreshing. It's like, oh, cool, yeah, I could handle that in that way. It's not the most unhinged thing, but what that brings up in me, that allows me to see different possibilities than always looking through the same lens. I don't actually need this lens that actually hurts my eyes, but it helps me see things in a new perspective, kind of thing, you know what I mean? Yeah. I think it's really fun. I think it's a really fun process, right? What does it feel like if I do this, be this, say that, create that? Because through doing this is how you can generate feeling, and then that will direct you, right? That serves as that motivation, that serves as that sense of volition. It gives you that energy. You're generating energy through different things, and then it's making you feel more well-resourced. You are more well-resourced. So you generate that feeling, and then you generate where that feeling takes you, right? Because even when you generate a certain feeling, whatever that is for you in a certain instance, there are a myriad of possible actions that you can take based off of that feeling. And there's a myriad of feelings that you can bring up, you know? Possibilities, so many fucking possibilities. And my thing is, if you can imagine it, it's a part of you. If you can see it, if you can feel it, if you can, you know what I mean? It's a part of you. It might not be something you wear. It might not be something you gladly identify as. It might not be something that you want to be. Like, it doesn't go with, I want to say brand. It's not on brand for you. It's not who you're trying to cultivate yourself to be, whatever. But if you imagine it, they are facets of who you are. And there are, again, myriad facets of who you are. And you don't have to actualize all of them. But if you can imagine them, they're a part of you. You can build on them, and you could potentially embody them if you wanted. And that's also why I think there's almost more goodness and good people than you would think, just because they're good, because they had so many possibilities to be different things. And if they are choosing to be the best people they can genuinely be, that's cool, because they spent time cultivating that and building on that and choosing that. There are so many possibilities. There are so many ways you could be good or bad. And for people to consciously choose the best that they can be, that's pretty rad. So anyway, moving on. This is how we use imagination to take us deeper into reality rather than out. You take ownership over the tools that you have to take ownership over yourself and the quality of your life experience. You can utilize imagination to empower yourself. And this is really fucking easy for sensitive people, because we're never not doing this. Peace out.